Hi, my name is Shivaramakrishna Srinivasan, and this is my video submission for a TAship position at UCSD. Today I'll be covering a very fundamental and interesting algorithm in computer science called the k-means clustering method. Now, the k-means clustering method essentially seeks to partition a group of data points which are previously unlabeled into k different clusters such that data points of the same cluster have very similar attributes and data points belonging to different clusters have largely varying attributes. So in this scatter plot here, we have n points that have two variables, namely I and j. And as a result, you can see that they're visually observable as three different clusters. But in order for an algorithm to realize that, the k-means clustering method works best. So the idea here is to actually define k clusters, and this is sort of a predefined step. And in this case, we're going to set k as 3 for this particular set of data points. And the second step is to actually place three centroids that are representative of each cluster, and we'll call them C1, C2, and C3. And we can place them randomly on the scatter plot such as this. So C1, C2, and C3. The next step is to actually identify the nearest centroid for each data point. So for each data point in ij, the nearest centroid is identified using the Euclidean distance metric, which is the same formula as the distance between 2 points in coordinate geometry. But I should tell you that this is actually not just restricted to two-dimensional space. For data points having 3 or more variables, the many different distance metrics can be applied, and one in particular, known as the Minkowski distance metric, can be used for higher dimensionality data sets as well. So in fact, the Euclidean distance metric is actually one such version of the Minkowski distance as well. So the nearest centroid is identified for each data point. So if you take this particular point here, the centroid C1 is closest to that, and therefore we can see that for each centroid we neatly can define three different clusters like so. And each of these data points are therefore assigned to those clusters denoted by capital C. Now, for each of the clusters that we have defined now, capital C1, capital C2, and capital C3, we need to iteratively identify a new centroid, which is defined as the mean of all the points in the cluster. And so if you take the first cluster here, capital C1, for example, I'll just label all the clusters here. If we were to take the cluster capital C1, we can see that the midpoint of all the points here, or the average, which is where the means term of k-means clustering comes into play, is that the mean of all these points, which is denoted by a point somewhere here probably, becomes the new centroid of that particular cluster. And step number 3 is 3 and 4 are performed iteratively till the algorithm reaches convergence, whereby no point is assigned to a different cluster, and we repeatedly just get the same assignment of points to their respective clusters. Or and so this is where the algorithm stops, or else as a programmer we could define a fixed number of iterations to terminate the algorithm. So this is essentially how the algorithm stops. Now you may be wondering who defines k. So this is one of the main drawbacks of the k-means clustering method, whereby k needs to be human defined and the algorithm cannot figure it out on its own. However, there is a trick to navigate that, and that's known as the elbow method, whereby the number of clusters that are defined can significantly be limited based on the within cluster distance. So if the y-axis represents the within cluster distance, or WC distance, and the x-axis represents the number of clusters, the within cluster distance actually rapidly remains or tends towards an asymptote at a particular point known as the elbow point, and this the number of clusters that are present at this particular elbow point becomes the optimal number of clusters, whereby the distances from any point to that particular cluster remains minimal and the distances between the clusters themselves are maximal. So thank you for allowing me to explain this.